Welcome to the Coaching Podcast, Coach for Success in Sport and Business. G'day everybody and welcome to the Coaching Podcast. My name's Emma Doyle. I'm here with Oliver Luck. I've heard so much about this incredible man, amazing journey. We'll jump straight into it, Oliver. The first question is the Vegemite question, the Australian spread. With that smile, I'm not sure whether you've tried it or not. You either love it or you strongly dislike it. What's your take on Vegemite?
So I lived in Europe for 10 years, and you can get Vegemite over in London, which is where we lived for a couple of years, my wife and I and our kids. And then my brother-in-law married an Aussie. She was from Perth, so I flew halfway around the world to get to the wedding. So I've had it a couple of times. I'll be honest, if it were the last food in the world, I don't think I would enjoy it. I just don't. So that's just my taste.
Thank you for your honesty and thank you for trying it. I love that. Yeah. In which case, because you answered that way, our follow-up question is, could you share a coaching moment? I know that you've got an amazing playing background, so either as a player or as an AD, athletic director, or as a coach yourself. Can you share a moment that didn't go well? And what might be some of the lessons? Does one come to mind?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a litany of mistakes that administrators make all the time, in terms of hiring and firing coaches. And of course, coaches make mistakes all the time as well in terms of strategy and their selection of players and motivations, whatever. I don't know if this is my worst mistake ever, but I do remember dismissing, if you will, firing in good old American English, a wrestling coach who I think was taken aback by that. He had been at this institution for many, many years. And like a lot of wrestlers, he was a small, very compact guy and had a good career, but just sort of faded significantly in his later years. And he all of a sudden gave me the finger in the chest, right? And he was pointing, and I thought he was going to take me down, and pin me and, I don't know, do what, choke me or something. for like a second, I thought there might be a physical altercation and he would have won. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I'm just a quarterback. We don't get into the melee, as they say. So, but anyway, that's one of many probably bad decisions or bad moments that I had with coaches.
Yeah. Fabulous. And what about on the flip side? What about something that really, really went well? And maybe what are some of the insights that you had after that experience?
Well, I was lucky enough as a college athletic director to be in a position that not many athletic directors are, which is to add a sport, right? In this case, it was a men's sport, which is even more unusual. Many programs have added women's sports over the years to, keep compliant with Title IX, et cetera, which is one of the great laws in American history. I guess we're 45 years, almost maybe 50 years into it. But we were able to add a men's sport, and we had a limited number of them. Long story short, we added men's golf. And that's a sport that we had at this institution back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and it was dropped. For whatever reason, it was dropped back in the 80s. So to go back and raise money, because that's what athletic directors have to do, to go back to the former golfers who had graduated in the 60s or the 70s or the 80s and tell them that their sport was being reinstated at the university and that we needed to raise money to endow I forget how many scholarships in men's golf, 4.5, 5, I don't know, maybe even less. So it wasn't that much money, but to ask them for contributions to have all those scholarships endowed so that they could never be taken away in the future. Right? That money had to be spent on NCAA varsity, men's golf. That was cool. Mm-hmm. And some of these older guys, who began to reminisce about their days as students playing golf on the golf team, they brought a tear to their eye because they had never sort of dreamed that their sport would be back, in the portfolio, so to speak. So that was really cool. And these guys were, golfers are, come from a pretty good, sort of socioeconomic class, right? Mm-hmm. So these guys were all federal judges, publishers of newspapers. I mean, these were pretty successful men, so no surprise. And for them to get sort of teary-eyed and very, what's the right word? Very soft about this. That was fun. That was one of the better experiences I had. I love going on those calls, because not only were we raising money, but we really got to sort of build that bridge that had been broken for 40 years to a sport that those guys all still love. They all still play golf.
Yeah, and I love that, just around helping people stay connected to sport and what sport can do, and athletics in America can do, beyond the sport as well. I really love that. Thanks for sharing. The next question is the sliding doors question. Sure.
So, I mean, the probably biggest shift for me, was back in the early, or I guess 1990. I played professional football, graduated from college, played professional football for a number of years. Went to law school at the University of Texas, was working as a lawyer, as was my wife. And we were living in Washington, D.C. We had one son, Andrew, who is the oldest of our four kids. He was just a baby. And I got a call from the National Football League asking if I would be interested in becoming, an executive in Germany for their fledgling league, their brand new league, which they then called World League of American Football, soon to be called NFL Europe. I speak German. My mother was born and raised there, so my siblings and I all, to various degrees, understand the language, and so we basically picked up. Right, my wife and I picked up, threw our 1-year-old in the car seat, so to speak, and and hightailed it over to Europe, and we ended up spending 10 years. 3 of the kids were born over there, the other 3, if you will. And that was a fantastic experience. Yeah. Not just, in terms of business, right? Building a league, for a sport that the Europeans really had no idea about, but also just living over there, visiting Paris and, the Eastern Bloc and Italy and Spain, you name it, all the travel that we did. That was special. And that was really my first job in the sports business. And I think I enjoyed it so much and enjoyed the experience that, I said to myself, well, I can make a career, in the sports business. And that's more or less what I've done. So that phone call probably put me on that particular path. And at that point, I really hadn't been thinking at all about a career in the sports business. Lawyers didn't really go into the sports business back in the 1990s, even MBAs, and it was a different industry. It's exploded since then with television and all the other streaming and sponsorships and all the other sort of business parts of sports. But that was a big moment, certainly. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's amazing. Thanks for sharing. And I'm assuming the rest of your children probably had some pretty good passports going on, being born over there. And they've been around. The 2 girls were born in Germany, in Wiesbaden, which is just outside of Frankfurt. Our youngest son was born up in London. So they've been all over the place, and if you raise kids overseas, you might experience this yourself. They tend to view the world as their backyard, right? They don't hesitate about going somewhere and living overseas for a while, or marrying someone outside of the U.S., right? But it's true, but the kids did. So it's singing to my philosophy, definitely. The world is such a small place, and we're all connected. You Aussies are great with your walkabouts and going all over the place, and I love that. That's a great sort of cultural thing that it is. I wish we had more of that in this country. We have such a big country, and so diverse. But there are 2 things that I'm passionate about. One is history in the past, and the other is travel, right? And seeing different places, and developing a sensitivity to how things can be done differently. It reminds me of that famous quote that I use all the time, which is, "The past is a foreign country, semicolon, they do things differently there." So if you study the past, you realize that things were done differently 150 years ago or whatever. And if you study the present, you realize, outside of the US, they might do things differently. Healthcare might be handled differently, in Europe or Australia or China or wherever. So those are 2 things that I really feel passionate about. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Our next question is in 1 to a maximum of 3 words. What do you think makes a great coach? If I had to pick 3 words, it's hard to pick just one. I would say love. You got to really not only love your sport, but love your players and, the whole sort of bubble, right, that exists in any sport, volleyball, tennis, football, you name it. I would say knowledge, because you do need to teach fundamentals. If you, I think, asked a lot of, sort of world-class sports people, how did they get started? It was often somebody teaching them the proper way to swing the racket, or, if you're, ski, take that slalom gait as a skier, or, shoot a free throw, or whatever it is. So I think you do need that knowledge. I don't think there's any substitute for that. And then the third thing, and this may be just me, I think coaches need a lot of energy, right? Because a season is long, it can be drawn out. We all know, not just games, athletes typically get up for a game, but you got to get up for practice. Practice is, as important, I think, in many sports as the game is. And, sometimes you all show up at practice, whether it's 85 scholarship football players, or, whether you're an individual sport and you're kind of blah, right? And you need usually an external source to get you going. And I think energy is and I look at, a lot of coaches around professional and college sports, but one coach that does this remarkably well is Pete Carroll, the Seattle Seahawks coach. I mean, he's, I think, in his 70s or close to 70, or maybe already past 70, but, he bounces around. Game time is when most people see him, me included. He bounces around like a 30-year-old. And I can only imagine it's the same thing at practice, right? That, he realizes somewhere deep in his, in his constitution, he sort of realizes the importance of bringing energy, even to 53 professional football players who theoretically, right, it's their job and they should be motivated, every day. But I think love, knowledge, and energy are the three words that I would choose.
Oh, fantastic. And energy is very dear to my heart, and I think with my background in professional sort of tennis coaching, often we're, dealing with not that many players. Like every time I watch NFL, I'm like, oh my goodness, the special team and the offense, defense, and bringing that energy day in, day out. The champion mindset isn't how we respond on our best days. It's how we, get up, isn't it, in training and on our worst days, and how
That's
we
right.
bring that energy. And the coach, no matter what's going on in your personal life as well, I think it's important to draw that line in the sand. So thanks for sharing that. That's awesome. And our final official question, where we ask you to ask us a question. What's that one question that sparks Oliver Luck's curiosity?
Wow, that's a good question. I don't know if I can answer that, just off the tip of my tongue. I'd have to give, a little thought to it. I've always been intrigued, by these parallels between, sport and business. And, you've got sport coaches who are often, called CEOs, and they organize the program. I'm not sure I know. Well, why is that different than a COO coach or a CFO coach? Or, because you got to manage, at least at the professional level, all sorts of, salary caps and things like that. So I suppose as I think about it now, the question I would ask, a business person and a coaching person is, could the two of you, could a head football coach at a Power 5 school and the CEO of a, mid-sized company, maybe a couple $100 million in revenue, could you swap? Could you transfer, could you take the substantive knowledge of coaching and running a business, whatever it is, real estate business, tech business, and could you swap that substantive information and both be as successful as you are in your chosen fields? I'd be curious. I mean, it's obviously completely speculative. But I do think, I've run into people in the business world who I think, oh my gosh, that would be an awesome coach, and vice versa, in the sports world, you run into people that would be great coaches. And I think of, and his name escapes me, but he was a gentleman who founded Ameritrade, what's now TD Ameritrade, and, built it up into a hugely successful business. And he was a football junkie and wanted to become a football coach, and nobody would hire him, right? Because he had spent 40 years in business or whatever. Anyway, long story short, he finally got an assistant coaching position, I think, at Nebraska. I think his company was based in Omaha, and then he quickly moved up the ranks. People recognized how talented he was, and I think he coached for a number of years at Coastal Carolina, did remarkably well. was a younger program that was being built up. Now he's retired from coaching, but is helping as sort of an executive director of football. His name, Joe Moglia. That's his name. It just dawned on me. And I always sort of admired him because he actually did both, I've had a chance to talk to him a couple of times over the years. Super guy, very smart, gets both business and sport. And I think there's more of a connection than we probably all realize.
Well, you've actually just sort of summarized the philosophy of the coaching podcast, is to discuss the parallels and differences between sports coaches and business coages. Sounds like I might have to get him on the show. I might have to do
Joe would be great. Joe Moglia, MOGLIA. He's, I think, still at Coastal Carolina with some sort of official position, not the head coach, but
fabulous.
Somewhere in their athletic department. He's a fascinating guy, excellent, and he would. Oh my gosh, he's covered both at the highest level. Yeah. Well,
that's the little official section. So I'm going to handball to somebody I'm sure who's going to continue to unpick your fantastic brain.
Tina's going to join us. Awesome.
She's going to join us.
Well, hello.
Hello, Tina.
How are you?
Wow, long time no see.
Yeah. So anyway, great to see you. So I was upset the sliding doors moment wasn't like hiring me at one point, but that was close second probably. I don't know.
Interviewing a coach in Beaumont, right? I think didn't we meet in Beaumont?
We did. Louisiana. Yep.
Yeah. Well, Louisiana, that's right across the border. I crossed the city.
Right. Sorry. Yep. Beaumont, Texas. Anyway, good to see you. It's interesting because I've obviously told Emma a lot about you and my time there. And I've found it all really interesting since I have done other things since I left, including coaching. But then now what I'm doing kind of on the opposite side of it in terms of the recruiting athletes to play collegiately and helping them. But I think, when I look back at my time there, one thing that I really appreciated was the culture that you were able to create with the coaches, because I can compare it to other places. And I felt like in a short amount of time, because you hadn't been there that long, I don't think prior to me arriving, how there was such a nice kind of group of coaches, including very, very successful, well-known coaches that normally maybe wouldn't pay attention to the women's tennis coach very much. But that culture that you created sat with me. Yeah. How did you do that?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, when I became athletic director, I had been, I think you remember this, had been on the board of governors at West Virginia University. So, just doing that, you sort of stay in touch with the athletic programs and different sports and what's happening and how things are going and the conference affiliation, all that stuff. So I felt as though, having been a student at WVU and having spent time on the board of governors and just being a fan, of the university and supporter, I kind of had an idea of what was going on in the department. And it seems to me that, the athletic department is no different than the law school or the chemistry department. Professors, right, coaches should interact a lot, because I think there's things that, one can learn from, you can learn something from Bob Huggins, and Bob Huggins, as good of a coach as he is, can probably learn something from the golf coach or, the baseball coach or whatever. So you don't want to overdo it, because you're certainly busy during your seasons and everything's sort of season driven and then recruiting and all that. But I think there's some value in trying to, get coaches together. The way I viewed it, I was sort of like the general, if you will, and coaches were my, 2-star generals or my lieutenants, and they had all the assistant coaches and student athletes below them. And that was sort of the best way, to spread the message of a unified culture. We also were going through something, you remember this very clearly, we were going through something that not every school goes through, which is our old conference, the Big East, was sort of falling apart. And, at one point there were only 6 football schools left in the Big East. So we were, very, very focused. I was certainly, and my president, Jim Clements, who's now the president of Clemson, we were like 110% focused on figuring out how we can remain relevant and get into what became a Power 5 conference. And that conference shift affected everybody, right? It affected football and basketball, just like it affected women's tennis and the wrestling program and gymnastics, right? So I think a certain level of solidarity was required, because some coaches would say, I remember having this discussion with Jill Kramer, the volleyball coach. She said, wow, that's a lot of travel. Because if you're in Morgantown, as you well know, Tina, you got to get the bus to go to Pittsburgh to the airport.
Yeah.
And on the way to Pittsburgh, you pass, University of Pittsburgh, you pass Robert Morris, you pass Duquesne, like schools you could be playing against.
Yeah.
But no, Jill had to fly out to Lubbock, to play Texas Tech, or to Baylor, to Waco to play Baylor, or, to Austin to play the University of Texas. And that's a different, sort of coaching setup, right? So, and I went through that with all the coaches. So I thought, some coaches are going to have a more difficult time than others. For some, it's a step up in competition. I mean, look at Randy Mazey in baseball.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I hired Randy, because, we needed a really good baseball coach to completely pull up the quality of our baseball program, because Big East baseball was sort of an afterthought. Big 12 baseball, produces national champions, every 3 years. So that solidarity, I think, was important, because everybody was facing in a different way, like a new reality. And that reality was, the Big 12.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when that change happened. I mean, there were a couple of things. I mean, I didn't have the travel schedule that basketball, volleyball has, so, I mean, I remember seeing Coach Huggins after his first few weeks, he was like sleeping at his desk. I was like, I mean, they're just constantly on the road, and volleyball too, with the Wednesday evening games and everything. I was just worried about, oh my gosh, how are we going to compete against, the Big 12 tennis is a huge jump up from.
Totally. Yeah.
So,
Baylor's got a great program. UT's got a great program.
Oklahoma,
right?
Texas. Yeah. So that was my biggest challenge, not the travel so much, since we only go home or away. We don't go back and forth more than once. So, And the other question I had is, from my experiences in other places too, is, one of my favorite sayings is the fish rots from the head down. And, in terms of like when I had challenges and I went in with you to talk about it, you're like, well, tell the girls to go watch basketball practice, and this kind of thing. And sometimes there's such a big disconnect. They would just look at me and go, well, this is basketball. Like, it's different. And I'm like, well, no, not really. It shouldn't be. And like that balance between coaching and with being tough, but also not being perceived as a jerk or someone that, the coaching has changed over the years. I know when I played, there was no feedback from the players. It was, you just do what you're told to do, and that was it. And if not, see you later. What are your thoughts on where that balance is, and how it's changed over time?
Well, the first thing I'll say is I think I encouraged your student athletes, your ladies, to go watch basketball practice, because by listening to Coach Huggins, they could find ingenious new ways to use curse words, right? In every form of the sentence, noun, verb, adjective, adverb, whatever. No, but in all seriousness, kids today are different. I got 4 kids. 3 of the 4 did college athletics, football, volleyball, and soccer. So they all had different sports, and it's a different world. It's not the yes sir, no sir that existed when I was, playing college football, and when you were playing women's tennis. It's a different world. I think watching a guy like Huggs, who's tough as can be, because that's how he grew up, but he loves his kids, and his kids will go into a foxhole for him if that's what it took, right? And he has an unbelievable ability to be hard and tough and tell a kid point blank, where he's missing out, and he's got to do this better. He's got to work on that. But, he also knows how to throw his arm around him after practice, slap him on the butt. I give him a word of encouragement. And, I've seen this now for years. They'll go into battle with him. So it is changing. And the great coaches in college athletics, I think of Nick Saban, who's a native West Virginian. They've changed with the time. They've had to change with the time. You can't be Nick's age. He was an assistant coach, if you can believe this, at WVU when I was a student athlete my freshman and sophomore year, which would have been 78 and 79. And nobody knew he was going to become the greatest coach ever in college football. But, he's had to adapt multiple times to different sort of attitudes that kids bring. And today, today might be the most challenging time. You've got the portal that's opening up for kids who are disgruntled and want to leave, and the coach doesn't like me, blah, blah, blah. You've got NIL money out there that kids want to chase. So, the adaptability of a coach, I think, is as important today as it's ever been. And I think you learn by watching other coaches coach, just like when you watch professors teach or professors profess. You learn from them as well. And I tried to sort of bring that message because I saw it with my own kids. That it's different. Kids today have a different expectation of what coaches say to them and how they approach them, and the sort of collaboration that coaches and players have.
Yep. Yeah. I've obviously quite a few friends with kids that are athletes, and one just signed with Georgia. My teammate from Georgia's son signed with Georgia. So that's been kind of fun.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
But
that's great.
What did so you had a kid playing soccer, volleyball, and football. And obviously to some extent you paid attention to the coaching, and obviously also you're talking about guys and girls, and there's maybe a difference in coaching boys and girls or men and women. How involved or how hard was it for you to not get involved, especially probably in the football being with your background, but
Yeah. That's a good question. I tried not to get involved, and it's easy in a sense. Once you say, I'm not going to be involved, I'm turning my son or daughter over to coach so-and-so, and I'll come watch the games. I'll cheer, when appropriate, give solace when appropriate but you watch, obviously. And certainly with football, because of my background, I did early on. When Andrew was a freshman at Stanford, he ultimately redshirted. Jim Harbaugh was in his second year, if I'm correct, at Stanford. And, he thought they ended up redshirting Andrew. And I do remember Jim calling me up before the season started, and the redshirt rules were different then. You couldn't really play at all. And now I think you can play like 3 games or 4 games or something, and then still get a redshirt, which leads to kids having like 7 years of college eligibility. But anyway, Jim called me up and he said, hey, my coaching staff has a difference of opinion. Some of us think that Andrew should be redshirted. Some of us think he's ready to play. And I said, Jim, it's up to you and your coaches. Don't, if you decide that it's best for Andrew to redshirt, go do it. Yeah, that's fine. No complaints. I'll be 100% supportive. If you decide that you think he can play and help the team win games, I'm 100% supportive of that. Your call. He was clearly trying to, get a sense of whether I would be like, irate or supportive of one position and not the other. But I think, parents have to, turn their son or daughter over to the coach, so to speak, and trust that that coach, knows what he or she is doing. And most do. Most coaches are very, capable, and you may not win a championship every year, but, you're going to learn good fundamental techniques. You're going to win, games, matches, meets, whatever it is, but you're also going to have fun, right? That's critical. When a kid talks about, to his mom or dad about, his or her experience, and lights up a little bit and has a smile, they've had fun playing. If it's sort of, oh my gosh, practice is so, then that it's not going all that well. So with Andrew and our youngest, who was a boy, played soccer at Yale. And then Mary Ellen, our daughter, played volleyball at Stanford. They all had, I thought, very competent in coaching, different experiences. Ivy League's different than, a Power 5 school. But they all enjoyed it. I think all of them would do it again. I like to ask all the time when they were done with their sport, hey, if you did it over again, would you, do football again for 4 years? Or with Mary Ellen, would you play volleyball again for 4 years? And they all said yes.
Yeah.
They give up certain things, and it might be a little bit tougher academically, and the travel, and all that can be a pain. Yeah. But they all, I think, enjoyed the experience immensely.
Yeah. I mean, that's the big thing I try with. So I don't even know if you know, but so I have a business that, like I said, helps athletes from all over the world. And, initially it was more tennis, and now I'm working with a few basketball players, which is a little scary. I probably need to give Coach Huggins a call and find out what this video is. This kid good? Collegiate pathway. I mean, you look in the Australian Open finals tomorrow, Danielle Collins, who played for UVA, is in the finals. Yeah. And you're seeing a lot more collegiate athletes in the tennis world playing in the Grand Slams and being successful. Obviously, it's a completely normal pathway in football and basketball, obviously sometimes only for a few years. But like you said, with your kids, and I feel the same way. It wasn't a perfect 4 years, but I do it all over again. And right. Again, the networking and all the different experiences that you have that you realize after the fact, like the free nutritionist, the free sports psych. I could use some of that.
Oh, just the gym.
The gym, the access.
And then access to a physical, therapist or an athletic trainer when your knees, bothers you or whatever. it's so fascinating now because, we are unique in this country with our universities, doing incredible things with student athletes. It doesn't happen, as you know, in, Germany or, China or, Asia, where there's great universities, but they don't really sponsor these massive sports teams. They don't put 100,000 people in the stadium and generate, $200 million for a school in terms of athletic revenue. And I've always viewed it as hedging your bets, compared to, let's say, what the Europeans do. And I know that because I lived over there for, 10 years. If you're a talented soccer player, or, look at Boris Becker, who started, picking up a racket at age 2, and by age 13, he was a professional. At 16, he's playing at Wimbledon or something, right? Boom, boom. And, he probably suffered in the long run from not having a high school or a college experience, because that's part of sort of what you need to do. You might have a bunch of money in the bank, but you may not sort of appreciate all those things that you learn to appreciate when you go through higher ed. So I always thought it was like a great hedge. Your son or daughter might be an incredible athlete at age 14 or 16. You might want to put that great soccer player in an academy that, Bayern Munich or Man U or, PSG or whatever, but they may not end up being, the next Messi, right?
Yep.
In the U.S. system, you can do that, right? You can play great tennis at Georgia or at Stanford or wherever, and get a great education,
Yeah.
And if you're good enough to play tennis, more power to you. Going back to the Boris Becker, Steffi Graf, they were sort of in one category, obviously unbelievable athletes. But the other guy who went to university and won Wimbledon was Michael Stich. And that's overlooked. It was a shock to the Germans that this guy would have played tennis, sort of at the university just against his buddies and all that, but still was good enough, to win Wimbledon and, to walk away with a university degree. So I think our American system, has that hedge, and that's good because, as it's hard, very hard to be a professional athlete. Very few people have that opportunity, and they should rely on, their education, which, comes basically at no cost to them.
Yeah. And the other thing, especially now, a lot of the schools are turning to allowing the kids to turn pro and come back and finish their degrees when that career ends. So, there's really, in my opinion, it's like a no-brainer. Go if you're that good, because that's what I tell a lot of parents. If they're that good and they're winning everything, first of all, they're the platform they're on they're getting tons of exposure. So in terms of, endorsements and things like that, you can't have a better platform than the collegiate sport world, really. And then, if you're that good, leave like Tiger Woods did, like McEnroe did. They didn't finish, but they kind of went through it and saw what it was all about. And then again, today, even more so because you can come back.
There's almost really no excuse for a professional athlete who spends a year in college, maybe 2, like Tiger did. No excuse for them not to come back. The university typically offers that at no cost. They typically have made enough money as professionals, to pay the tuition anyway. But because you do, there's a long life to live after your active career is over. Andrew had a great NFL career. He left when he was ready to leave, but he probably could have played 5 or 6 or 7 more years. But he decided he was done. And he had his college degree, and he's doing lots of other things that are fun. So there is a long life to live after your professional career is done. Professional athletics is tough. I don't care what sport it is. It's a grind. I'm amazed at guys like Brady and Federer and and others who've been around for so long. They're almost alien in their sort of physical capabilities to stay sharp and fit and mentally with it. After playing for 20 or 20 some years, it just blows my mind.
Yeah, they're the freaks of. They're definitely the freaks of the sports,
Yeah.
The other thing too with Becker potentially is, people that aren't getting educated at that level are not handling their money so well often either.
There's a whole story about Boris and his challenges, and that's I don't want to say college is for everybody, right? Vocational school and other programs are great for a lot of people, but you do. Those 4 years that you spent in college or I spent in college or I watched my kids, those are critical years. They really mature. They learn, they get exposed to all sorts of other things that I don't think you would get exposed to if you were just, on an academy team and literally playing soccer 4 or 5 hours a day. Right? It's just a different environment. That's that's, I think, more or less healthy for the vast majority of people.
Thanks so much, even just for this opportunity. Already I can feel your energy as well is awesome. So
well, thank you. It's nice.
again.
It's nice seeing the both of you, Tina. Great to catch up a little bit.
Awesome.
And thank you very much. Enjoyed being on the podcast.
It's been an absolute pleasure to bring you this episode on the Coaching Podcast. My name's Emma Doyle and I'm a performance coach. That's coach and mentor. If you'd like to become a high performance workplace coach, then check out www.emmadoyle, that's EMMADOYLE.com.au and start your journey today. Thanks for listening.